She thought she could have it all: marriage, family, and secret lovers. I agreed to her open marriage, but I was already planning my silent revenge. What happens when loyalty meets betrayal? Welcome back to Reddit Drama Unpacked, where real stories hit harder than fiction. Grab your popcorn, this one's going to be wild. When Sarah hit 38, something inside her began to itch. Not a physical itch, but that nagging whisper of, "Is this all there is?" Her husband, David, was still the man many women envied her for: tall, charming, successful in his architecture firm, and most of all, unwaveringly kind. 2 teenage kids, a paid-off house, 2 cars in the driveway, and quiet dinners on Sunday. Stability, safety, predictability. But predictability started to taste like bland oatmeal every morning. Her co-workers, mostly younger, mostly divorced, filled the office air with tales of adventure, excitement, and wild new love lives. "You know it's 2023, Sarah," laughed her friend Amanda. "Nobody lives like our parents anymore. Monogamy is so 1990s. Open relationships are liberating." At first, Sarah laughed with them, but their stories wormed into her brain late at night. The thought of forbidden touches, flirtations, and attention from younger, eager men lit a dangerous fire she thought she'd buried long ago. And then came the night she made her decision. She walked into the house past the family photos, the memories, the sofa they cuddled on for years, and found David cooking dinner, humming gently like always. He turned, smiled. "Hey, sweetheart. Rough day?" She swallowed hard. "We need to talk." They sat across from each other, kids upstairs, oblivious. David poured 2 glasses of wine. He sensed the gravity. "What's wrong?" Sarah breathed, steadying her nerves. "I love you, David, I always will, but I need something different." His brow furrowed. "Different how?" She hesitated only a moment. "An open marriage." The words slammed into him like a freight train. David stared at her, eyes narrowing. "Say that again." Her voice quivered but didn't falter. "I want us to open the marriage, see other people. I don't want to lie or cheat. I want honesty, freedom." For a long moment David was silent, his hands clenched around the wine glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was like ice. "So, I'm not enough for you." "That's not what I mean." "That's exactly what it means, Sarah." He stood, pacing the room. 20 years, 2 kids. "I gave you everything." Tears welled in her eyes. "It's not about you. It's about me trying to feel alive again." David turned, his voice sharper now. "Alive? You want to feel alive? Get a dog. Start a hobby. Don't blow up our family for some midlife fantasy." But it was already too late. She had crossed the point of no return. The days that followed were like walking barefoot on broken glass. David didn't scream, he didn't argue, he didn't even slam doors. Instead, he shut down, like someone had flipped a switch and drained every color out of his soul. At breakfast, he poured coffee like always, but never met Sarah's eyes. At dinner, he asked the kids about school, but never spoke a word to his wife. The silence was worse than any screaming match could have been. It was the sound of a heart bleeding out, quietly, invisibly. One night, as Sarah scrolled through her phone, lost in her thoughts, David finally spoke without looking up from his book. "So, when do you start sleeping around?" Sarah froze. The words sliced through the air like a dagger. "I'm not." "It's not like that," he chuckled bitterly. "Isn't it? You want your freedom. Freedom comes with visitors, doesn't it?" "David, please, don't be cruel." He closed his book softly and stared at her, his eyes hollow but sharp. "I'm not being cruel, Sarah. I'm being realistic. You've made your choice. You get to go find someone new while I stay home and... What? Watch the kids? Pretend everything's fine? Sleep in our empty bed while you live your new life." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She tried to reach for his hand, but he pulled it away gently. "You've changed the rules," he said quietly. "So don't expect me to play by the old ones anymore." And so it began. David moved into the guest room that same night. The house became a cold battlefield, not of shouting or arguments, but of distance, avoidance, and invisible walls. The kids noticed. Of course they did. They weren't stupid. Sarah tried to act normal, She cooked, cleaned, attended school meetings. But when the nights came, she sat alone in the master bedroom, haunted by her decision. But the loneliness didn't last long. Soon the whispers from Amanda and the girls at work turned into introductions. "You deserve to feel alive again, Sarah," Amanda whispered one Friday night. "James from marketing, he's single, fit, 10 years younger, and he's already asked about you." Sarah hesitated, but not for long. The thought of being desired again was intoxicating. The attention, the compliments. The feeling of being wanted, not out of duty or routine, but pure electric lust. And so Sarah went on her first date in 20 years, with James. Dinner, drinks, flirtatious touches. One thing led to another. And that night, in a hotel room downtown, she crossed the line that could never be uncrossed. Sarah thought she could balance it. She truly believed she could juggle the fire she lit and still hold on to the life she had built. For a few months, the arrangement worked, or so she told herself. James was fun, young, energetic, full of compliments that reignited a part of Sarah that had been dormant for years. At home, she still cooked dinner, still helped the kids with homework, still smiled at David across the room, but David's smiles had vanished completely. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was simply gone. Like watching someone drown in slow motion while pretending to breathe. Sarah's late nights became more frequent. The kids noticed. They were no longer little, teenagers, sharp as razors, and painfully aware of the tension in the house. One evening, after she stumbled home close to midnight, Matthew, their son, was waiting in the kitchen. "Where were you, Mum?" His voice wasn't angry, just hollow. "I was out with friends," she lied softly. "With James?" Matthew asked flatly. Sarah froze. "How do you know that name?" Matthew looked at her, eyes older than his years. "I'm not stupid, Mum. You think Dad doesn't know. We all know." Sarah's stomach dropped. The illusion was crumbling faster than she could hold it together. Upstairs, David stood quietly in the hallway, having heard everything. He didn't interrupt, didn't interfere. He just watched, his face unreadable. That weekend, Zara, their daughter, confronted Sarah directly. "Are you still married to Dad, or are you just roommates?" The words stabbed deep. Sarah tried to respond, but the lump in her throat choked her voice. "I still love your father," she whispered. "Then why are you never here?" Zara snapped. "Why do you smell like someone else every time you come home?" Sarah broke down crying, but her daughter showed no sympathy. "You broke him, Mom. You broke us." The truth was now a monstrous weight, crushing what was left of the family. After months of barely functioning as husband and wife, David finally accepted the truth. His marriage was dead. The paperwork just hadn't caught up yet. But while Sarah was chasing fleeting thrills, he was carefully, methodically, building his next move. He had spent too long sitting in the ruins she created, quietly holding on for the kids. But now the kids themselves were turning inward, retreating from both parents, trying to cope with the growing fracture in their family. That was the final signal David needed. He consulted a lawyer, not to divorce yet, but to prepare. Financial planning, property evaluations, custody options. He wanted every piece in place before making his move. This wouldn't be a messy, emotional reaction. It would be a clean, calculated extraction. Meanwhile, Emily, his longtime friend, quietly became his anchor. She didn't push. She didn't seduce. She simply stood by, offering calm, stability, and, more than anything, a reminder that not all women destroy the men who love them. Sarah, on the other hand, began noticing small changes she couldn't quite explain. David stopped arguing altogether. He stopped reacting to her late-night returns. He never asked where she went. The emotional leash she once tugged on was gone. Instead, he redirected all his focus to the children. He cooked dinner, showed up at every game, helped with college applications. At first, Sarah mistook it as David finally adjusting to their arrangement, but deep down she could feel it. She was losing him, not angrily, but absolutely. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, Sarah tried to confront him. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice almost pleading. David sipped his tea, calm as always. "About what?" "About... Us. David set the cup down and leaned forward. His voice was low, steady. There is no us anymore, Sarah, not in any real way. Tears welled up in her eyes. But we're still married. Legally. Yes, he nodded. Emotionally. That ship sailed long ago. You set it adrift. Sarah broke, sobbing at the table. But David no longer reached for her. He simply sat still, like stone. I stayed for the kids, he said. Nothing else. Her sobs filled the kitchen like ghosts of what once was. David stood and left her there. He walked outside, breathing in the cool night air. In that moment, he felt lighter than he had in years. This wasn't revenge, this was freedom. And soon the real separation would begin. David wasn't cruel. He never wanted to destroy Sarah. But he refused to let her destroy him any further. He had lived through enough silent nights, enough bitter mornings, and enough broken looks from his children to finally act. First, he handled the finances. Months prior, with his attorney's guidance, David discreetly opened a separate account. All his income now went there. He refinanced the house under a trust. Credit cards were closed, joint accounts frozen, quietly, legally, safely. Sarah didn't even notice, too busy in her new world of freedom. Next came the documentation. He meticulously gathered every text, email, photo, and proof of Sarah's extramarital adventures. He never intended to smear her publicly, but he needed leverage. In court, evidence speaks louder than tears. His lawyer commended him. "You're one of the most disciplined clients I've ever seen. Most people come in here emotionally broken, but you're surgical." David simply nodded. "This isn't about rage," he said. "It's about protection. For my kids. For my sanity." In parallel, he rebuilt his life quietly. His relationship with Emily deepened, still chaste, but emotionally profound. She never asked for more, but her presence was his constant shelter. The kids adored her. They saw the care, the warmth, the steady hand that their mother no longer provided. Then the final moment arrived. It was a Friday night. The perfect timing. Both kids were at their sports tournaments. The house was empty, except for David and Sarah. She returned late as usual, high heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Her face lit up in surprise, seeing David sitting at the kitchen island, papers neatly stacked before him. "You're up?" she asked, forcing a smile. David's voice was calm, detached. "Sit down, Sarah. We need to talk." The smile vanished. Her instincts screamed that something had shifted. "What's going on?" He pushed the envelope across the counter. "Divorce papers." Her breath caught. The color drained from her face. I thought we agreed." "We agreed to an open marriage," David interrupted, voice even. "Oh, you pursued it. I accepted for the kids. But what we didn't agree on is living in purgatory forever." Tears welled up instantly, but David didn't flinch. "This isn't sudden. It's been years in the making. You've lived your life. I'm simply choosing to live mine." "But the kids," she whispered. "They're almost grown," David replied. "And they see everything, Sarah. They see who's present, who's absent. They're not blind." Her hands trembled as she glanced at the documents. Division of assets, custody arrangements, a fair settlement. Not vindictive, just final. "I don't hate you, Sarah," David said softly. "But I don't love you either. That was your choice." Silence hung heavy between them. Sarah's shoulders sagged as she realized the true cost of her freedom. "And Emily?" she finally asked, voice hollow. David met her gaze, steady as stone. "Emily waited. She respected boundaries you shattered. She will be part of my future, not my past." A long, cold pause. Then, almost in a whisper, Sarah said the words that haunted her more than any argument could. "I've lost everything, haven't I?" David stood, gathering the remaining papers. "You lost me the night you asked for an open marriage. This is just the paperwork catching up." And with that, he walked away, quietly, calmly, finally free. The days following that Friday night were a whirlwind of paperwork, lawyers, and carefully orchestrated silences. David had unleashed the process, but he remained calm. Sarah, on the other hand, spiraled. At first, She tried every tactic, pleading, "Please, David, we can fix this. I was confused. I still love you." Blame shifting. "It was my friends. Janet pushed me. You know I wouldn't have done this on my own." Manipulation. "Think of the kids. This will ruin them." Seduction. One night she even appeared in the bedroom doorway in the silk robe he once adored, whispering, "We don't have to lose everything." But David had long since detached. His heart had already broken years ago. What remained was quiet resolve. His voice never rose. "Sarah, I'm not angry. I'm simply done." The lawyers handled the rest. Their joint assets were surprisingly easy to divide thanks to David's preparation. He retained his business, the house was sold, and the profits split fairly. The kids' college funds were secured. The most vicious battle wasn't money, it was custody. Sarah fought hard for more time, not out of maternal devotion, but out of fear of losing what little remained of her old life. But the kids were old enough to speak for themselves. The judge spoke gently but firmly. Given the children's ages and their stated wishes, joint custody will be granted, with primary residence remaining with Mr. David. Sarah sobbed quietly in court, while Zara held her father's hand tightly, eyes fierce, protective. Matthew simply kept his gaze low, broken by years of watching his parents drift apart. Outside the courthouse, Emily waited by David's car. She hadn't been part of the proceedings, she respected the boundaries, but she was his anchor. "It's done," David whispered, voice barely audible. Emily stepped forward, embracing him deeply. "You did everything you could, David. You protected your kids, and now you can breathe." That night, they all returned home, David, Emily, Zara, and Matthew, to the house that now finally felt like home again. But for Sarah, the storm was only beginning. Her friends began to drift away, uncomfortable by the wreckage they had partly fueled. Janet moved on to her next toxic romance, leaving Sarah behind. The younger men she once entertained disappeared when the drama grew too heavy. At work, whispers followed her. The once vibrant woman who had pushed boundaries was now viewed with quiet pity or cruel judgment. And every weekend when she visited her children, she saw the warmth that now radiated between them and Emily. No resentment, no awkwardness, just quiet acceptance. That stung the most. One Sunday afternoon, while sitting across from Zara at a cafe, Sarah asked the question that had haunted her since signing the divorce papers. "Do you hate me, sweetheart?" Zara didn't answer immediately. She stirred her coffee, looked up, and spoke softly but firmly. "I don't hate you, Mom, but I'll never forget who was there and who wasn't." Sarah nodded, swallowing tears. "I just wanted to feel alive again." Her daughter's eyes narrowed slightly. "You wanted freedom. You got it. But freedom always comes with a price." Those words echoed louder than any courtroom verdict, and that was Sarah's new reality, a freedom colder than any prison. Months passed. The court battle was over. The house was officially sold, and David had fully moved into Emily's cozy home. But it was more than just a house. It was a sanctuary, a place where laughter returned, where the air no longer crackled with tension, and where every corner didn't whisper of betrayal. David's transformation was profound. The gym visits weren't just about physical strength anymore. He walked taller, smiled easier, slept peacefully. Even the streaks of grey in his beard looked dignified now, rather than weary. Emily had always loved him, but now she saw him fully, not just the broken man who needed comfort, but the strong man who survived hell and came out stronger. Their relationship bloomed with a tenderness that neither dared dream of before. One quiet evening, as they sipped wine by the fireplace, Emily gently placed her hand on his. "David, you're ready now, aren't you?" He looked into her eyes, deep pools of warmth and patience. "I am," he whispered. "You've healed?" She smiled. "Because you held me while I bled," he said, his voice cracking. Emily wiped the single tear that escaped his eye. Weeks later, David finally proposed properly, not with grand gestures, but in the kitchen where they often cooked together. "Marry me, Emily," he said, slipping the simple ring onto her finger. Tears sparkled in her eyes. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The kids adjusted better than anyone expected. Zara, having matured far beyond her years through the family's collapse, became fiercely protective of her younger brother, Matthew. One night, as David was tucking Matthew into bed, the boy whispered, "Dad, are you happy now?" David paused. "Yes, son, I finally am." Matthew smiled, hugging him tightly. Even Sarah slowly found her own version of peace. She remained involved in the kids' lives, respecting David's new marriage. The bitterness had dulled, replaced by acceptance. At one family event, Zara's high school graduation, all of them stood together for a photo. Sarah on one side, David and Emily on the other, and the kids between them, smiling. And in that single moment, there was no rage, no judgment, only quiet understanding that life, though broken once, could still rebuild something new. 2 years later, David and Emily sat on the back porch, watching a small toddler, their child, giggle and chase butterflies across the yard. "Hard to believe, isn't it?" Emily whispered. David wrapped an arm around her, his voice full of gratitude. "Every bit of pain led me here, to you, to this." Emily leaned against him, her eyes glistening in the soft evening light. "We made it, love." And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, David didn't feel haunted by the past. He simply smiled, held his wife and whispered, "Yes, we finally made it. We